All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's demo. Today we will be seeing a demonstration of a multiple control plane Kubernetes cluster deployment from Meek. And I will hand it over to Meek to tell you a bit more about what you'll be seeing and for a demo.
All right, so hi guys, good to have you with us today. So as Scott said, today we'll explore the Kubernetes deployment on the grid. So we're working on with the TF Grid K3s repository. You can see the link here. So we'll start with a quick introduction to Kubernetes, and then we'll jump to the demo. So basically, this deployment we're working on today, this is a repo available on GitHub, all open source, of course. So it's a complete solution for deploying a K3s Kubernetes cluster on the ThreeFold Grid. We're using OpenTofu, but of course you can use Terraform. This is for the infrastructure provisioning. And then we're using Ansible for the configuration management. And this deployment has a dedicated management node equipped with K9s as a terminal user interface. So you'll see this is pretty cool. So the overview of the deployment, the purpose is to deploy lightweight Kubernetes clusters on the ThreeFold Grid via the 3 nodes. On the architecture side, we have the control plane. So with this, we run the Kubernetes control components. The worker nodes will have the execution of the application workloads. And then the management node, this is the central administration with pre-installed tools. So the specificity, let's say for this deployment, is that we're using a management node on the grid itself in the same form as the other control plane nodes and worker nodes. So this is has certain, let's say, benefits in terms of rapidity, let's say, of execution with the network. In terms of the network, we're using WireGuard as VPN, and we also set all the nodes with the miscellaneous. And the tech stack, as we said, OpenTofu for infrastructure, Ansible for the automated configuration, and K3s for the Kubernetes. So the deployment is in 3 phases, but you can all do it with just one line with make. So basically, we have the infrastructure phase that you can run separately with make infrastructure. So basically, this provisions the ThreeFold Grid VMs via OpenTofu. Then we establish the WireGuard connection, and then we generate the required inventory for Ansible, and Ansible will be used then to manage remotely. Then we have the platform phase, which can be run with make platform. So there we will configure the K3s on all nodes using Ansible, and then we set up the cluster networking and load balancing, and we install on the management node all the tools necessary to administer to manage, let's say, the cluster. And then the application phase, for now, this is like a placeholder. What we want with this deployment is basically you can deploy your own Kubernetes cluster, and then on top of this, you can add your own application. So this gives a little bit of a, let's say, a main template how to proceed with this. So what are the advantages, let's say, of the K3s? Basically, we have a lot of flexibility and scalability since we have a high availability configuration with multiple control plane nodes and multiple worker nodes. Then we can configure all resource allocation. We have a multiple deployment profiles. So we'll show you this later with the OpenTofu deployment. Then, as we said, we have a single command operation with just make. You can do anything. Well, all that is needed to deploy the cluster. And then to connect, you do make connect. And to clean everything, you just can use make clean. So security first approach, we're using a secure credential handling. We'll show you this in a moment. And then a complete management experience. So we're using the terminal user interface K9s. So this is pretty cool. We'll see later. So just an overview for you guys if you don't know the tools yet. So Kubernetes, it's an open source container orchestration system for automating software deployment, scaling, and management. It's really the industry standard. K3s, it's a highly available certified Kubernetes distribution. So basically, it's like a lightweight version of K8s that is mostly used in general, but this can also work for production-ready workload. OpenTofu, we saw it in different demos in the past. So basically, it's a open source version of Terraform. So it's infrastructure as code that you can use to deploy on the grid. And then Ansible, that's really a nice thing, I think, to show today is the suite of software tools that enable infrastructure as code. And basically, it helps to deploy and manage node from, let's say, instead of just running scripts or doing manual stuff, you can just use Ansible. And the K9s, we can see here the user interface. We'll see it in more detail later. So without further ado, let's say I want to deploy. I'm going here. I'm taking the the repository, so git clone. So we can see here, I have my deployment here. Then what I did already that should work is that you can use these 3 lines here. Let's say I can even show you the nice looking version. Basically, you can take those 3 lines, set plus O history. So this will, let's say, hide your mnemonic from the history shell, and then you can put your mnemonic in the environment variable. So basically, what we want to do first, add to structure. So we want to copy paste the example, and what we want to do, of course, today we want the real deal. So management node here will and then the specs of the node. Then if we want to deploy with IPv4, this is by default. So you don't have to change it, but let's say if you wanted to have it without IPv4, you just set false here. And then there are some examples. Let's say this is really to give you the whole template already done. So basically, today what we want to do is we want to deploy, we'll try on 3 workers and 3 control. So we have to check to find the proper node on the grid, which we'll see in a moment. And then the deployment size, we can see here that we have a different version for testing development and small production. And then if you want to have a higher, let's say more specs for a bigger environment, so then you can go. I wrote this, let's say, for a basic open EDX deployment, but you can do anything that you want on the cluster. So what we want to do is to remove the command here. So basically what we'll be looking at is 3 control planes with 4 CPU, then 8 megs of RAM and 100 gig of SSD, and then 8, 16, and 250 for the worker, because this is where we will store the data, so we want more space there. So basically, what you can do to find this, let's say you go on the grid. For now, today I'll deploy on Terraform. And let's say I want to start and find public IP address. So I will write 2 here to make sure to not have any false positive. But then I'll look for the different farms. So let's say, okay, so what we said we needed, basically, let's start with the worker node, right? Because this is what we want for the public IP. So we can see here the node 1, node 8, and that's good for now, 1 and 8. And then do I want to take 10? No, because I said I don't have enough space here. So what I want is to find a node with sufficient space. So let's say node 13 here. So we're good for our worker nodes. So then I can remove this free public IP. I don't need it anymore for the control plane. Then I will, of course, want to find different nodes. So let's say to distribute my risk. If I could put everything right, all the cluster on one node, but then if this node goes down, I'm not in a good position. So let's do the same thing here. So what we said, we needed 100 gigs of space for the control plane. So basically, we can see that node 12 should do the trick. And then we see we have enough space in the memory. So I'll write 12 here. And of course, you could set it with a scheduler, but I think it's relevant to use this process just to manually find your node and make sure maybe sometimes you have a preferred node. So here, same thing, 920. And then finally, the last thing we want is to find the proper management node. So this is a really lightweight node. Basically, it's a 1 CPU, 2 gigs of RAM, and 25 gigs of SSD. So we can basically take anything. So let's say 920. Okay, so here, let's recap. Now I have my management node. I have the ID. I have the specs for my management node. Then I have my 6 Kubernetes cluster nodes. And then I decided that this is the deployment, the specs I want to deploy. So we're done for this here. So now what we want to do, basically, you just need to go to the proper repo. So we can see here, and then I should just write make, and then everything should be done automatically. So this is the moment that you pray for your personal God. For me, I pray for the mathematic God. So let's hope it all works. And while this is happening, we can have a look of all the steps. So basically, we can see here that it's applying the infrastructure. So now we are generating the Mycelium keys. So then we can access and connect with the nodes with Mycelium, but we are also setting WireGuard for a private network, virtual private network. So the nodes will communicate between each other with WireGuard. So this is a really fast way to communicate, let's say, as it can be within the LAN of the farm. So now we can see it's creating the network. So at the same time, while it's loading, really it's a long deployment, right? So basically we just did make and everything is happening. But then it takes a couple of minutes, let's say, to deploy. And it's fun because with Ansible, we'll see all the steps that is going on. So let's see, while it's loading, I'll show you how we created let's say this repository. So with Terraform, what we have is the main TF. This is where the magic is happening, let's say. But when we're using the credential, as I showed you before, this is just to have a simpler way to interact, let's say, with the deployment. So basically, you could put everything in main.tf, but it's really useful to use variables. So we can see here, for example, the variable Nginx, we set it to sensitive, so it won't show in the deployment. Then SSH key, this uses by default your ID 25519, but it also uses by default other keys if it's not finding this one. But usually we want to use this as it's the safest. But you can see here, if it doesn't work, you'll look for this one. But if you want to set your own, of course you can. You just need to go here in the deployment and uncomment this and write where is your key. And you can also just uncomment this line and write your key directly. So this is pretty cool. So we can see here that it's going well, not going backward. So we can see this phase was the deployment of Terraform. It's been happening, that's good. Then we have our output, our WireGuard address and everything. And then we have the information here to connect with the WireGuard. Then we can see the WireGuard IPs of the 6 nodes we deployed and the public IPs, because as we said, we're setting a public IP. So this is the script that we're seeing here. We'll see it one at a time, but basically what we started first, we ran this script infrastructure, which we deploy Terraform and everything. And then what we're doing is then we use the WireGuard here. Basically take the input and we set the WireGuard connection. So this is what we saw. We'll have the ping here, ping.sh. This is a script to test that everything is reachable. So you can see here that all the nodes are a success. So the management node, it's working. Then the control plane nodes, it's working. Same thing for workers. So basically, when let's say we're done with this, what is happening is we're going into this directory platform. And this is the standard, let's say, industry standard way to use Ansible. So we have our site here, site.yaml. So basically, we have our configuration of the management node. Then we'll configure the common nodes, which is all the nodes, except here, the management node. So we'll configure the control plane and the worker nodes. Then we'll configure the control plane nodes and the worker nodes. Then finally, we will set the KubeClt, which is the file to access the cluster and to manage it remotely. So when we deploy this, we create automatically the inventory in it, ini. So basically, we can see here, this is the script that generates it. So once again, we go into the Terraform infrastructure deployment and we take the information, the WireGuard IPs and everything, and then we set it here in the inventory.ini. And then this is what will be used by Ansible to connect. So basically, we set that the management node is this IP address, and then the control plane node is those IP address. We set root. So basically, what it does is that it knows that if it needs to connect, it will do root at and then the IP address as you're used to working with when you use SSH. So it's basically doing this, but with the Ansible. And here we can see that we're using the K3s version, the latest, the current version. And now we set the primary control node to be node 1. So this is where we will install first the Kubernetes, and then it will propagate to the other control node. And here it's important to set the Python environment. But just a reminder, what I did for what you have to do is just you set here the node ID you want, the specs you want, and basically you just sit and decide your node, and then you just run make. So what I'm showing you is you don't have to touch anything. It's just you clone the repo, you set your seed phrase, and then you set the configuration file, and then you just run make. The rest is all automatic. And this takes a while, as I said earlier, because it's installing everything. So we can see here. So I think what's fun to look at, it's the steps. So basically we say, okay, configure management, gathering facts. So this will always gather the facts of all the nodes. So for this step, we just have the management node. And then we can see task, install required packages for management node. So we can see here, we go in role, then we're in management, task, main. So we can see we are at this step here right now. So what Ansible is doing, it will download all those packages, and then it will set the host name and all the steps. So then we will install KubeClt, then install Helm, and then we'll install K3s for the user interface, terminal user interface. So you can see all those steps will be done one after the other. And what is very interesting with Ansible is that it is idempotent. So this means that if we run the script, something happens and we want to rerun it, you can always rerun it and you will have the same outcome. So it will, it's something that's very useful for a production workload. So you can deploy and have an idempotency. So let's see, as I said, the steps can take a little bit of time. All right, so I'll show you around maybe. So we have here the documentation. So how to use K3s, we'll see later when it's deployed. But basically, when you connect with it, you can have different control to access your node and your different nodes and information. So this is a basic documentation on how to use it. So we'll see later. And same thing, if you have some issues, we have some documentation for, let's say, security. This we explain how to properly set your credentials so it's safe to use. And in troubleshooting, if you have any issues, then you can have a look here for the deployment. But usually it's going well on the grid. There's no issues. So maybe let's see when it's loading. So we saw the management node. So if we go here in the site YAML, you can see the order. So basically, it will run the configure the management node. This is what is happening now. Then we'll do the common phase. And so let's have a look. But maybe just to show you, so we saw that install required package has been done. So we see the state change. So this means that it worked. So basically here we are install KubeCtl. So if we go in our management task main, we can see that it's at the KubeCtl state. So here, so this is what it's running. And then we're now at Helm. So you can see it's installing Helm on the management node. So you can see it's some steps are faster than the other, right? So of course it takes time to install all the requirements on the node, but then after it's pretty fast. So now we're here, download archive. So it's downloading the latest version, setting it up on the management node. Create temporary directory. So that's pretty cool, I think, because you can see it's all doing this. It's as if you were running a script. But let's say you're running a script and then there's an issue in the middle, you need to rerun the script, then it will all do the whole step one at a time. But with Ansible, if you already ran, let's say this management task, if you rerun it, it will say that it's already done, so it won't change your files. It will just go to the next. So we can see here, okay, change. So this works. So now move K3s binary to user local bin. So this is what we did here. So basically what Ansible does, it does it directly. It sets the source and the destination, and it gives a proper permission. So everything is done. So once we have this, we clean up the temporary file. Then we want to make sure the installation path is properly done. So now we see that we finished this version, this task. How can I know this? Because I can see here. So we can see that configure common. So we are now in the common task here on the left. And we can see we gathered the fact of all 6 nodes, and then it's deploying. So we can see main gathering facts, and then configure K3s control plane. So this will be done one after the other. So we can see what's happening, let's say for the common task, then we will download all the required packages for the control plane nodes and the worker nodes. Then we will set the IP table. This is basically, instead of, let's say, using a firewall like a UFW with Linux, we set the IP table directly. So the connection will be secure, and only the ports we want are accessible. So basically what we do here, we set, let's say, the proper permission for Kubernetes and Ansible access. And yeah, there's a couple of stuff. Let's say we won't cover everything. So, okay, what we see here. We see that gathering facts, management node is done, then recap. Okay, we see here, everything is good, okay. Unreachable 0, failed 0, skip 0, so everything was done properly. So running deployment for all components, configure management node, gathering facts, see it's good. So basically we're still updating the cache. So as I told you before, this is what takes a lot of time because we're installing all those tools here on all the nodes. So we can see here, update apt cache, and it's working one at a time. So we can see here, we did this, we updated the cache, and then we'll install all the packages. So of course, this is the demo, so I show you everything, but usually what you would do is you press make, and then you go for a walk or you work on something else, right? But then that's the magic of it. So it's all automatic. So we're installing the required package. It will take a while, and then the other steps are quicker. But I think it's worth it to just take the time to, let's say, get to learn Ansible. So we can see here the come true, update cache, yes, and state present. So we want to make sure this is done properly. And then once this is done, we'll go to the other steps. But maybe, well, what we're doing is, okay, we're setting the directory for the system command control. And then this is setting, let's say, the IP table, as we said before, but then we want to make sure that the Kubernetes cluster has access. When you want to use Kubernetes, you will disable the swap. This is some basic stuff. And then what we're doing here, we're setting the host name based on the inventory name. So basically, instead of having your host name, let's say Ubuntu, which is the FLIS we deployed, it will change your name with the inventory name. So if we go here, inventory, you can see here, the name for setting. Basically, node 1, we will assign the node with this IP address and so forth. So basically, this is the name of the host name that we will set. So we're still in the same steps. It takes a while, but let's see for fun the other. So control. What are we going to do then? Okay, we're checking. Okay, is the K3s uninstall script there? This means basically that K3s is installed. So we check, okay, is it already installed? It's just looking at the path. And then we will clean existing K3s installation. As I said, we want to have something that is idempotent. So if you're running it and something happens, you want to rerun it, then we make sure that the deployment, the Ansible deployment will start and let's say fresh for some steps that are needed to start from the beginning. So we can see here, ignore yes. This is really important for some steps when you want to make sure that your deployment will not fail if a step is not properly done. So basically, if we want to stop the service, but the service doesn't exist, well, of course, we don't want to stop the whole deployment for this. So we set ignore. And here the same thing, we're running the uninstall script and we say yes if something is happening. So you can see here that we required package on node. So it's taking for it's from deployment, but it's automatic. So here we'll continue, let's say, clean up K3s data directory. So basically you want to make sure, as I said, if you deploy it once more, it will be idempotent. And then we'll wait a little bit for the deployment to finish. And then we'll make sure that K3s is installed. This is the control plane node. And then we'll look if the cluster is initialized. And then the interesting part is this. So when we get there, basically when you're deploying with Kubernetes and you have multiple control planes, what you want to do is set one control plane first with the cluster, and then you will propagate the cluster to the other control plane node. So basically here we set primary control node. So what we do, go in inventory host name and set the primary control node. And we say that is primary control. So basically what we do is we go here and we take this first node and we will say, okay, this is the primary control plane node. So what it will do, it will install the K3s on the control node, the first one, the primary node we decided. And then once this is done, it will get the token from the primary node to join. Then we will set the other control nodes with the K3s installation. So you can see here, this is all something that say that you could do manually, but then it's all done with the Ansible, the script. So basically, this is the parameter we need to set to make sure that the Kubernetes cluster will work on the grid. So we disable traffic, disable the load balancing, and the Flannel backend we use a VXLAN. So basically, this is how the nodes connect to one another. Once you have the WireGuard connection, this is your virtual private network between the nodes. But then within the Kubernetes cluster, it will use VXLAN to communicate. So you'll see when we do this, there's always you need some time, let's say, to propagate or to finish to install. So this is really important. So we can see here that we set 10 retries with a delay of 30 seconds between the retries. So basically what we'll do, we're running this command, kubecontrol get nodes, and we'll set the inventory host name that we said before, and then we'll look, is it ready? So once this is once it's ready, then we can go to the following steps. And when is this done with Ansible? It says, okay, I'll do this when it's not the primary control node, and when the K3s binary does not exist and the config does not exist. So when we have this, we can set kube control on all the control nodes. So basically, we'll create the kube directory. This is by default where it's set. Then with Ansible, we will set the permission. And then we will copy the K3s config to the proper directory. And then we will update the kube config with the correct server address. So basically, this is just to make sure that it works well. This is, let's say, the local host, but then this will be the control IP of the primary node, which is the WireGuard IP. So we can see here, we finish the required packages, then we created the modprop directory, then we're configuring the kernel. So if we want to see, we're still in common, right? So we can see it here that we're in common. So here, load kernel, let's see where we are, load kernel. Load kernel, this is going well. So basically, we're just making sure that it's present. Load kernels module immediately. One of the big steps of this deployment is when we're setting the IP table. So we'll see later on. So now we're creating the system control directory. You can see this is fast, right? Because you just created a directory. So some steps are faster than others. Now we're here, configure syscontrol parameters for Kubernetes. So this is what I told you before, that we're setting the IP tables. So you see this will go faster here. And of course, this step is the common steps, right? So we're deploying on 6 nodes, so it takes longer. The other steps, control and workers, it will be only 3 nodes. But if you go back here, let's say, the only difference here, instead of 3 nodes, control nodes, if you put 10,000, it will install on 10,000 nodes, right? So then you need to ask some farmers to bring more nodes because we don't have 10,000 nodes yet. But this is really the cool fact about it. So let's say you want to give it a try, you want to do some testing, you can just set here. I set it here as a template, but basically you just need to change this array. So let's say we could just set 12, and then we will be just one node, one control node. But you could do, let's say, some deployment, let's say for the big deployment would be 3 control nodes with 5 workers or more. And this is interesting when you want to scale. So here we are, command set host name based on inventory. So we're here. Now here we're updating the etc host and with the inventory name. So this is, we'll see later on, maybe if we have the time, but it's basically just setting the host name as I said before. So create required directory. So basically it's doing just the steps one after the other. And you see one step that say that takes a little bit of time is this one when we're configuring the firewall rules. So as I said, we're using IP tables directly instead of using, let's say, a client as a UFW. So here it's setting the proper directories for K3s. Okay, so let's say, where were we in the control? Here, we're making sure it's ready. This is just double checking, let's say, to make sure the deployment is properly done, because sometimes it takes a little bit of time to deploy. And this here, we're using metal load balancing. You'll see later what we're using. Basically, we're setting a Nginx. And Nginx, I never know how to pronounce this, but ingress controller.
Nginx.
So Nginx. Thank you, Scott.
I said it wrong for a long time too. I had to
me too.
look it up one day.
Yeah. So Nginx controller. So this is fun. Basically, we'll have an ingress controller to let's say distribute the workload and have communication between the nodes. And then once this is done, we want to make sure that it's ready before going to the next one. So we can see here this is really long, Open K3s TCP port. So that's what I said before. We're setting the IP table and making sure we have the proper ports open for the Kubernetes cluster, but we don't want any more, right? Because we want to keep the deployment safe. Okay, so let's continue maybe. Worker. For the worker, what we're doing here, same thing as before. We're making sure, okay, check for agent uninstall script. So basically when the script is there, it means that K3s is installed. So same thing here, we check if K3s is installed, then basically we will clean up the K3s installation. Let's say state stop. So basically we want to make sure that if K3s is running, we stop it. And then we will run the uninstall script. Basically, it's just, as I said before, idempotency. We want to make sure that if we rerun the script, it will work. And then we will force the removal of the K3s binary, and then we clean up the data directory. And then once the uninstallation is complete, which is not necessary for the first time, so you see it will go fast. But then we check if the K3s is installed. And then we will look if the nodes are already joined. Then we'll look if the K3s agent is running. And this is all, let's say the kind of thing that you would do manually or system control, you will check, and then it's all done automatically. So this is, let's say, just a troubleshoot step to make sure that we're not installing something that is not working. And if it's not working, we force the removal. So then you wait for the uninstallation to complete. And then you re-look, it's just to make sure that, let's say, when you deploy it, it will all work on the grid. So once this is done, you install K3s Agent on the worker node. So you download the install script with this URL. And then you set proper permission. You set it in temporary directory because you don't need it to keep it. And then same thing, we will set the token fact. So this is all done automatically with the information we gathered before. So where are we now? Play, configure K3s control plane. Oh, this means that we finished the common task here. So now we are here in the control. So this is, we won't go over all of this once again, but this steps is quicker. So basically check if the K3s is installed, So this is all happening on the control node, right? So you see here, why it's skipping, because we don't need it, right? Clean up K3s directory. As we said, this is the first time we deploy. But let's say something happened and in a week you want to redeploy it to make sure it's clean, then it will clean up the directory and reset it. So we can see here a lot of node is skipping. So basically what I told you before, why do we have skipping node 2 and 3 and not node 1 is because we want to install first K3s on the node 1, and then it will propagate to the other node. So we can see this goes a little bit faster. So we are here, line 91, K3s installation on primary control node. So you can see we're skipping the node 2 and 3 because we don't need for now. And how we did this is basically here we set the primary control node. We said, okay, the primary control node is the first one. So wait for K3s to be ready. So you can see it's very quick. Wait for K3s services to be running. Maybe while we have the time, what I can show you is that what we did here with Terraform, we deployed basically with an flist. And this is here. So flist. So what we're doing now is that we're using Ubuntu 24.04. So basically, if you don't know, it's this is a, let's say, long-term support. So we have 5 years of support. So basically, if you're setting your Kubernetes cluster, you're starting with this flist. You really take, let's say, a bare Ubuntu flist, and then you install everything on top of it. So it's really, let's say, it means that it's very resilient because you don't, let's say, we're not taking an flist that we tweaked and then we add some stuff. So we're just starting from the Ubuntu deployment. But you could do, if let's say you want to have a company on the grid and you want to, let's say, skip all the steps we're doing now, what you could do is to install most of those packages on flist, and then you could use those flist. So let's say I could create an flist for a worker node, an flist for a control plane node, and I would set it there. So basically I would it would be a quicker deployment. So let's say you want to have a better user experience for your users. Let's say they want to deploy a Kubernetes cluster on your company. They would go to your website, and then they click deploy cluster. Then it would take, let's say, instead of 30 minutes, it could take 10 minutes, right? Because you already start with an F list that is populated with the proper packages. But I think it's relevant to start with this bare F list, because we know then that it works completely, and that we don't have to maintain the F list and then maintain the deployment of the Kubernetes cluster. We know that we start with the basic Ubuntu F list, and then on top of this we add the other information, the other packages. So where are we now? Control. So we can see here now it's the opposite. It's keeping node 1 because we want to set it on the secondary control node. So like this will be node 2 and 3, but if I had 5 nodes, it would set on for the nodes. So we can see we're here. Doesn't take too long. So we went through the workers. Where were we? Did we finish? Set token facts, basically create directory. This is real. At some point you see it's all apple and oranges, or oranges and clementine, I should say. All right, so the last step, if you go here, now we saw common, we saw the control plane, the worker, and then the kubeconfig. This is very, very important. Basically, once you have your kubeconfig file, this is what gives you access to the Kubernetes cluster. So we can go here. It's not a big one. So basically, we set primary control node IP fact. So we say, okay, we set the proper IP address. Then we will get the kubeconfig content. We'll SSH into the node and get the proper file. And then we'll process the local kubeconfig when found. So basically, this is setting. So, so we can see here what happened. We have the control plane nodes. We can see that they're ready. So the control plane part is done. And you can see this is some tests just to make sure we set the name flag based on host IP. So now we can see that the control plane part of the deployment is properly done. We can see here the internal IP. So how does it set this? As I told you before, we go in inventory, then you can see node 1. This is my address. So you can see it here. And you can see the images we use. It's Ubuntu 24.04. And as we said, this is here that you can see. First, this is what we deployed, so all makes sense. And in the background, we're using container. Oh no, we have some red. It's okay. Look at this, ignoring. So this is okay. So some steps, as I showed you before, it's okay to ignore the errors. It's just to see that status. And most of the time, let's say for these steps, it's okay that this status is failing. It's not necessary for now. So now what we're doing on the control node, we're installing the different packages, Elm, and the different way to access, let's say, the Kubernetes cluster. So where are we now? If we go in control, main. So we're almost there, right? And of course, we're using Ansible here for the Kubernetes deployment, but once you understand how Ansible works, you can use it for anything basically that you would use a script, but you want to have it, let's say, idempotent and use the functionality of Ansible. So apply, metal load balancing, and we see here ignore error. Yes. Why do we set this? Is because sometimes it will take more time to set the ingress controller. So in this case, we'll just ignore the error and we'll continue deploying on the worker node. Maybe one last thing that we didn't see is the ansible.cfg. So this is just setting, let's say, this is necessary, let's say, for your Ansible. So basically, Ansible will say, okay, what is my inventory? It's inventory.ini. So this is this one here. So it's just basic parameters. So timeout, we'll set it to 60 seconds, deprecated warning false, interpreter Python auto silence, but as I told you, the interpreter, we're setting it here. So basically we say, okay, go into the user bin Python 3 for the Python interpreter. So this is a very necessary, let's say, very relevant because Ansible it's using Python. That's how it's working under the hood. So what else? Let's say we'll let this run for a while, but so if you want to see platform, this is what we're running now, basically the script. So this is just going in the proper directory, in this directory platform. And then it's just setting the steps. So what we're doing now, as I showed you, we're using make. Basically, make calls scripts and scripts calls Ansible. But if you wanted to run it yourself, you would just go in the proper directory of, let's say, platform here, and you would run this Ansible playbook. And you say, okay, take site.yaml, and then T is for task, run the management task. Okay, this is done. Okay, good. Run command, control, worker, and kubeconfig task. Okay, good. And this is basically how it works. So we can see here, we're now in the worker step. So what happens, it's, as always, it says, okay, play. Now we're join K3s worker node, gathering facts. We only gather facts of the worker nodes, of course. And then we're running the steps. So what we saw here, workers, we're here. So once again, all the steps will be done one after the other. And you can see this is quick. Oh, something is failing. Of course, it's okay. Ignoring. So this is okay. We just want to make sure, okay, is the agent running? No, that's all right. Then what we're doing, we're removing the binary in case of it exists. And then we're fetching the token from the primary control node. So this is really important. Basically, this is how you set the Kubernetes cluster. You need to have the token from the primary control node, as we saw before. And then you can see it's all node 4, node 6, node 5. It's all using node 1, which is the primary control node that we set before. So far, so good. Basically, once worker is done, we'll have kubeconfig just to set the proper configuration file on the node, and then we'll be ready to access the cluster. So run K3s Agent. So we're at this step now. So you can see here we have you can see that was some of my testing with the AI when I was exploring. Basically, we didn't have enough timeout, but you can see it's quick, so you don't even need that much. So now we have 2 out of 3 that already done. And you can see wait for K3s Agent service, and we're almost there, right? There's a few steps left. And once this is done, you'll see the kubeconfig part is quick. So as always, what I told you is that what takes a lot of time there, it's the packages, because we need to download all the packages. So what you could do is you set an F list with all the packages for your worker node, your control node, and even you can set the IP table and everything. So you know that if you want to deploy it, it will go fast. But I think it's important here to show you all the steps and to start from scratch on the Ubuntu, so you know it's always working. And then for, let's say, specific use case, you could set an F list. So here we are play, set up local kubeconfig for K3s cluster. So same thing here, we'll gather the facts of the management node, because we just want to use this one. How can I know this? Let's say I go here. You can see, set up local config. This is what we saw here. Set up local config. This is where it comes from. And then we say only take the K3s management. What is K3s management? You go in inventory, and then it's here. K3s management, it's this node. So that's installing on our management node. So you can see here, what we have here is a demo that is not failing. So far, so good. Basically, we have the management host. Okay, change. 3 things were changed. Unreachable, no. So we have no failed. Something were skipped, as we saw. Some steps are not needed for all. But basically, we see that all the nodes of our cluster is ready. We have the management node, the tree control node. So what we're waiting now, waiting for K3s cluster to stabilize. Ta-ta. All right. So we can see this works. Ta-ta. So now the deployment is done. So how long did it take? Not much, right? So what we see here, this is the information. So we can see our 3 control plane nodes are ready. It took 12 minutes total. Not that bad, right? And then the worker nodes are here. So far, so good. So once I have this, I want to connect into the node. I have the information here. Okay, you can do make connect. So we recall, let's say make connect. So now I'm connecting into my management node here, 10.1.3.2. And you can see that's what I showed you before, but this is instead of having the standard Ubuntu welcoming, we changed this. So basically, when you log in, you can see, okay, your Kubernetes cluster is using this configuration file. This is the control plane. The control plane is running here on this node. Then we have the nodes are ready. And you have the tools that are available. So kube control. So basically, I could do kubectl get nodes. And then I can see that all my nodes are there, available. And we have, just for fun, but we set a shortcut. So if you just do K, get nodes, it will work. And then what we're seeing here, we have Helm already that you can just do with H. So you can see Helm is installed. And then finally, the cherry on top, I would say, is the K9s. So basically, if you just run K9s, it will run K9s. And you can see here, okay, this is the CPU. This is the memory of my cluster. And then, oh, but I don't know how to use it. Well, just look at the doc. Okay, so here we have the comments. So let's say we want to see the nodes. I will just click here, colon, then node, you can see here. And here I can see that all my nodes are up and running. So basically you can have a little, let's say, okay, I want to see my namespace. Then you can see all your namespace. So we have ingress controller, kube system. So everything is there and it's ready. So once we have this, we're ready to install, let's say on top of this, our application. So just to show you, once you are in this stage, everything is done. So if something happens and you just want to connect, you can just do make K9s, and then it will connect directly on your K9s user interface. And if you do make connect, it will connect to your management node. So once you have this, you can see everything is done, everything is working. So basically, a nice page is this one, but there's a lot to do with K9s. So basically, it's all the information from your Kubernetes cluster. You can have a user interface. All the information is there. So let's say you want to see your app running, you can see your deployment. So all the information. And if you want to explore more, you have all the documentation here. So once you have this, you have a functioning, highly available Kubernetes cluster running on the grid. And if you want, I hope you want basically to deploy more apps and an application on top of this. So what you can do, let's say if you do here, if I run app, make app, it will just run a dummy app, basically. We can have a look here. But what it does, it just gives you an example of how you would do it. It says, oh, your K3s cluster is ready for application deployment. Customize this process in scripts/apps.sh to deploy your application. So basically what you could do is add another task in your Ansible platform for your deployment. So let's say you want to deploy Nextcloud and you want to make sure that it's highly available, then you deploy your Kubernetes cluster, and then on top of this, you will run your Nextcloud application. And what I would recommend you is that once you have this done, you could work on a different repository. Let's say you go here and then you just say, let's say application, and then deploy your application so you know that it's modular and evolutive. So this, you don't touch this one. This is your Kubernetes cluster, it's working. And on top of this, you can set your app. But the nice thing is that once you have this, let's say the manual version is this, you just, what I showed you with make connect. But once you add this, you can just SSH into the node, and then you have access to the management node. And then when you have this, you have access to the whole Kubernetes cluster. Well, it's not at all the proper line. So it was not the proper IP address. So you see here, I'm already in this. So if I just show it again, because when you get there, you're so happy. But basically, when you're in this management node, you have access to the whole Kubernetes cluster. So what you can do is then you can go into this management node, and then let's say you have some application, you could say, okay, I have some deployment ThreeFold tech, and then app Nextcloud, and then you will clone it and you install it. But once you have this, you can do all of this from your management node, and the response time will be quick because it's all within the same network. So this is the demo for now. Well, for now and forever. Once you have this, it's done. Everything is there. And you see here the K3s YAML. This is the KubeClt. So this is I don't care here because I'll destroy this, but you don't want to share this file, and this is what you need. Basically, that's what we set on the management node to access the Kubernetes cluster. So this is your password and sensible data to access the cluster. So this is locally. So this means that I could control from a distance from this local computer, but I also set it on the management node for a security reason, and it's quicker to, well, maybe just for fun. So if I do make ping here, or no, even if I do make permission, this is another script we have that will check the cluster permission. So we can see everything is allowed. So when you see this, you know that your cluster is properly set. And the last one is the wildcard. You don't want permission for this, so it's for security purpose. So we set it clearly here. So basically, we see that all the permissions are passed. And for fun, you can always do make ping, and then it will ping your nodes to see if everything is working. But usually, if you can just do make connect, make K9s, then you can see that you can access the whole deployment and see that everything is working. Thank you for being here, and see you at the next demo.